there everyone, welcome to Tales in Text and I'm your host Nisha and welcome to another book review. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing a book that is replete with stories that I'm sure many of you have heard of growing up. They may not be the same stories, but they may be versions of these stories. But I'm sure you are going to be familiar, if not all of you, at least many of you are going to be familiar with the protagonists of the stories, who are Vikram and Vetaal. That's right. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Vetalapancavinsati by Sivadasa. And this is the book. Vetalapancavinsati or 5 and 20 Tales of the Genie by Sivadasa is one of the foundational texts from which the Vikram and Vetaal stories actually come. The whole Vikram and Vetaal stories, the stories of King Vikramaditya, the brave and valorous king who always took the right decisions, who followed dharma, who made sure society was in order, and who helped the people who needed his help. He is someone who is sort of entrenched in Indian folklore and in Indian mythology and in the Indian imagination. And as strong as his presence is, a person or an entity whose presence is even stronger is that of the Vetala. The Vetala or the Vetaal, also called Vetaal, is a creature, an entity who has haunted the imaginations of many a young child growing up in India or growing up in a South Asian household. Ever since I think we could understand the language, and our parents and our grandparents were telling us these stories as we were growing up. I remember I was a child when my grandfather would tell me and my sister these stories of Vikram and Vetaal, and I would just be in awe. I would be scared of what curveball the Vetaal would pose in the form of a new story, and I would be eager to hear and listen to what answer Vikramaditya would give so that he can escape unscathed from the hands of the Vetala. It is only as an adult when I realized that these stories have so many iterations in different cultures, in different regions of India, in different languages. And I was prompted to dig a little deeper and find out, is there any critical edition? Those of you who know me from my Mahabharata videos, you'll know how I love finding critical editions of books just so I can figure out and just so I can read, these texts which are believed to be, or at least are reviewed by scholars to be, the most authentic forms of these books, because I love to trace the most authentic versions of these tales. And I was looking for a series of stories or for a text that would kind of bring me close to as authentic a source to the Vikram and Vetaal stories. And I came across two books. One was the Vetalapancavinsati by Sivadasa, and there is another book in my collection. I'm not going to talk about it right now, but I will make a video about it later once I finish reading the book. I'm just kind of like partway through it right now, so it's going to take some time, but I will make a review of that book as well. But these two books are believed to be the only texts that are still currently available, which hail from the storytelling tradition from which the Vikram and Vetaal stories have come to us. So strap in, get something to eat, get something to drink, and we are going to dive into the world of Vikram and Vetaal. To make this video as information rich as possible, I have made a few notes, from the introduction. This book, Vetalapancavinsati, is actually translated by Miss Chandra Rajan, who is one of the preeminent Sanskrit scholars and translators. Now, in her introduction to this book, Miss Rajan talks of how Vetalapancavinsati is believed to have been authored by a man called Sivadasa. But there is little to no historical information about who Sivadasa actually is. Sivadasa could be the name of the person, or it could be like Kalidasa, a nom de plume, a title given to a person. In this case, Shiva's Dasa, the servant of God Shiva, or the one who has dedicated himself to God Shiva. So there is little to no information about Sivadasa, whether this is a person or this is a title, and there is no information in terms of the exact timeline or period in which these stories were authored. Although the stories are believed to have been put in writing sometime between the 11th and 14th century CE. Again, mind you, these at the timeline that I'm giving, 11th to 14th century CE, is just of the writing. That is when the tales were put onto paper or put onto in the form of text, to be read and to be shared. But it is believed that these stories of Vikram and Vetaal actually come from a much ancient time period, which the translator has said in the introduction, might actually predate our Itihasas and Puranas, might actually come from a time that is pre-Brahminical and pre-Hindu. The evidence that is given in the introduction is the very term Vetala, which does not exist in Sanskrit and is actually a word that does not seem to hail from any of the modern day Indian languages that we have right now. The word Vetala seems to have been borrowed or adopted from a different language that does not seem to be in existence right now. And the whole concept of who a Vetala is the kind of entity that Vetala is something that is still not, I would say, very clear cut and very cut and dry, as they say, very clear, very obvious. And it seems to have been borrowed from a different culture or seems to share similarities with creatures from other cultures as well. So the introduction states that there is not much known about the actual origin of these texts. It was at one point believed to have been a part of the Brihad Kada, which is the extant collection of massive folklore, from which a lot of the other texts such as the Nitopadesha, the Hitopadesha, and a lot of the other folk tales that we have in India. Tales in the Katha Sarita Sagara seem to be from a larger text of Brihad Katha that were actually orally transmitted to generations, and then at a much later time were penned down by the authors who we credit today to be the authors of those texts. So a lot is mysterious about the Vetalapancavinsati and of the Vikram Vetaal story. But what we do know is that this book, the Vetalapancavinsati, contains 25 tales. There is believed to have been a few more tales, but that they are lost to time, they're lost to history, and therefore 25 is all that is remained today. Now, the context of the Vikram Vetaal story, for those of you who know, you'll be familiar with the kind of background in which the whole story takes place. But I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to it. We have King Vikramaditya, who is a very famous ruler, who is known for his dharma and for his wisdom. One day, a mendicant or a monk by the name of Shantishila comes to his kingdom and asks him for help. And Vikramaditya has this rule that if anybody comes and asks him for help, he will never refuse them and he will make sure that he completes the task. What Shantishila asks is that in the cremation ground outside of the city, there is a Simshipa tree. Simshipa tree is considered to be one form of the Indian rosewood tree. And on this tree, on one of the branches of this tree, hangs a corpse. And that corpse is inhabited by an entity. Now, Shantishila wants to perform an occult ritual. And in order to perform that occult ritual, he needs the powers of the entity that is residing in that corpse on the Simshipa tree. And he needs to perform this ritual on the new moon night that is going to be coming in 14 days time. He asks Vikramaditya that I do not have the physical capability to go and get this corpse and come back, and I also need to prepare for my ritual. Therefore, king, I need you to bring this corpse to me and to bring this entity to me. In return, once I complete my occult ritual, I will bless your kingdom so that you get all the riches in the world, and that any wars you fight, you always win, and you are remembered forever as the greatest king of all time. And Vikramaditya is very happy with this deal and he agrees. And from there, he starts going to the cremation ground every day to bring the corpse. Now, as he's picking up the corpse and starts walking towards the kingdom again, towards Shantishila, the corpse suddenly starts to speak. And mind you, the corpse has not become animate. It is the Vetala, the entity within it, that speaks. Now, who or what exactly is a Vetala is a question that has boggled the minds of people for generations. And this is where we come to the English title or translation of this book, which is 5 and 20 Tales of the Genie or the Jinn. right? The translator has chosen the word jinn or genie because of the characteristics that the Vetala displays, which seem very similar to the characteristics of the jinn. Now, the jinn is an entity that is that is highly spoken of, and it is prevalent in Islamic traditions. And the jinn is it's not just like Aladdin's jinn, which who lives in a lamp. Jinns can reside anywhere both on earth, in the skies, in the underworld, in natural formations. They can reside in trees, and they can reside on parallel universes. But certain jinns, like I mentioned before, they do reside in trees. Jinns have the power to affect people physically. They have the power to pose challenges, whether moral dilemmas or physical challenges to people. They have the power to possess individuals, and they function a lot like humans in terms of their societies and their cultures, but they're still a little different. There is this beautiful, beautiful podcast called The Hidden Djinn on Apple Podcasts. I'm sure you can find it on Spotify and other podcast players as well. It's called The Hidden Djinn. Do check it out. I discovered it a few months ago and I'm just hooked to it. It's just a stunning podcast. And in that podcast, you get a lot of information about how jinns and jinn societies function. And I think that'll give you a really good context when you're reading this book, or before you read this book, or even after you read this book. And you can kind of understand why possibly Chandrarajan actually translated the word Vetala into jinn or genie. Because the Vetala is certainly not a ghost or a spirit. It's not a demon, because it is not, the concept of demons don't exist in Hindu culture, or even pre-Hindu culture. This concept of demons, like how it's there in Christian ideology, we don't have the concept of demons. We have asuras and devas, and we have all these other entities like yakshas and so many other creatures, you could say, or divine beings, but we do not have the concept of demons. We have ghosts, but the ghosts function differently in our mythos, in our folklore. Therefore, the closest translation for Vetala is considered to be the jinn. Now, this whole story starts off with Vetala posing a question or a moral dilemma to Vikramaditya. Now, each question is actually embedded in a story. The Vetala narrates a story, and the story is extremely morally ambiguous and has an open ending. And the Vetala expects Vikramaditya to answer. Now, if Vikramaditya answers, the Vetala says, because you answered, I'm going to go back to my tree. I won't accompany you. But if you know the answer and yet you keep quiet because you want to take me to that monk, then I will make sure that your heart bursts and you die. So you answer, save your life, but I go back to the tree. You don't answer and I kill you. And so, caught between a rock and a hard place and intrigued by the proposition of the Vetala, Vikramaditya puts on his thinking cap and he agrees to answer the questions. Now, one of the most interesting facts about this whole setup is, growing up, we were always told by our elders that, the Vetala asks these moral dilemmas, and every answer that Vikramaditya gives is morally right. That is where dharma lies. But in the Vetalapancavinsati, in this book, you see this in this book, that Vetala never expects the right answer. He expects an answer. That's it. He expects an answer. He doesn't care what the answer is. The Vetala has his own opinion, and he just wants to find out what Vikramaditya thinks. Right? He never expects the right answer. He never expects the dharmic answer or the morally right answer. Because the Vetala is very much aware, and you can see this as the Vetala narrates the tales, that morality changes, morality shifts. Morality is not the same for two separate individuals. And so he just, or it, for the lack of a pronoun, wants to find out what Vikramaditya thinks. That's it. And this brings me to the point of how Vikramaditya actually answers. Vikramaditya is a king, and he is used to thinking of dilemmas, of challenges from the perspective of a ruler. And he is looking at how to safeguard the prosperity of the city, the peace of the city, the stability of the city. And a lot of the answers that Vikramaditya gives is from the perspective of his kingship, of his ruling, of how he would answer were these questions to come to him, or were these problems to come to him in his kingdom on any regular time, in his regular life, right? And he answers these based on his code of kingship and his code of ruling the kingdom. So it's very interesting because this actually also poses a moral dilemma to us as the listener or the reader. Because if we were to be in the presence of the Vetal, right, and we were to ask the Vetal, you know, okay, fine, I'm willing to listen to your stories and I'm going to give you some answers, then the way we would answer, the answers would be different. In fact, and I think I'd like to show this to you right now, I actually started making these set of answers for each of the stories that I read. So for example, let me just open this up to a page where, yeah, there we go. So there is this tale 12, for example, of the royal priest who lost it all. And I have actually written down my answer here in the form of a post-it note. So at the end of each story, I was actually writing down the post-it story, the my answers. So each of these are my answers. So like there is, like in my entire book, there are quite a few post-its where I've actually written down my own answers in the book, and I wanted to kind of compare, you know, how my thinking versus how Vikramaditya's thinking is. And I think this is such a beautiful way to kind of engage with the stories that you read here. And if you're going to pick up this book, I think you could do the same too if you feel like it, of course, because it's such a fun way to actually engage with the stories, and also kind of check as to, you know, what your own personal thinking is versus what the thinking of the time was, right? Then again, we can't even say so it was the thinking of the time, because this was the thinking of a king, mind you, like I mentioned. Therefore, I'm sure that if these stories were told to a person from a different community, from a different profession, from a different background, I'm sure that person's answers would have been different from Vikramaditya as well. So to me, that shows that the Vikram and Vetaal stories, although they are told to us as tales of wisdom, as tales from which we have to learn life lessons, they are also extremely morally ambiguous. They're very subjective. And at times, they also ask for a lot of, they kind of create a dilemma in the way we answer as well, because they bring our personal dharma and societal dharma sort of against each other, clashing with each other. So you don't really know what is the right answer, right? And on an unrelated but kind of related note, this kind of makes you wonder how God Yama makes decisions in the first place. You know, Yama is supposed to be the decider of dharma, the one who judges how and weighs how souls have lived their lives when they were on earth. It's a tough ask. It's a tough job. Just reading these stories and kind of trying to guess the answers and think of what might be the right way to proceed. I mean, that was quite a task in itself. So I don't know how God Yama does it. I don't. So yeah. So these stories are extremely subjective in terms of showcasing to us only Vikramaditya's personal opinion or his answers, his perspective as a king. But at the same time, one of the things that we actually see in this book is how the book reflects society in terms of how society functions, in terms of how society views gender relations. In particular, the relationship between men and women, the romantic relationship between men and women, and the issues of consent or lack thereof. Right? There are a lot of stories which deal with romance. Some of them are consensual, some of them are non-consensual, some of them are romance where both partners are equally committed, some of them are romance where there is only one-sided affection and the other person doesn't want to continue it. And the repercussions of these entanglements between two or more people. There's issues of marriage, of issues of theft, issues of cultural identity, issues of death, just you name it, there is something here. Every aspect of humanity, every aspect of a person's life, right from life to death, from birth to death, everything, there is a different aspect. It's very human because it reflects various realities. And it shows us how gender relations kind of play out in this process, how caste relations play out, how caste dynamics play out, how economic dynamics play out. That is the financial struggles or financial differences and similarities. How do they affect the kind of interactions that people have? So you see people from different castes, class, genders, and economic backgrounds come together and kind of like. Come together into these stories, and we can see how their sort of, I would say, interactions are. You can see some, I would say, some similarities in the caste dynamics and gender dynamics that you would see in the itihasas. For example, how women are viewed. There is one section where women are unnecessarily berated for no fault of them. Just negative stereotypes about women are perpetrated and perpetuated in the book as well, and that kind of shows you. And that is the same vein that you can also see in the itihasas in many of the sections. If you've actually followed my Mahabharata reviews, you will see about I speak about many areas in the Mahabharata where those same sentiments are echoed, and which I feel like is just completely unnecessary and unwarranted for the situation, especially. And which seem to also have affected how people today, men and women, how their gender relations are affected, how people view each other is also, you can see the impact of all of these belief systems and all of these stories and how they have affected reality today. So you can see all of that here. Some of the things in terms of caste relations, gender relations, economic relations, all these socio-political scenarios that you see in the itihasas, that you see in some of the stories of some of the Puranas, I felt an echo of those, a sort of a watered down version of these practices and these beliefs and these interactions in the Vetalapancavinsati. So it is very hard to kind of figure out whether these stories predate the itihasas and the Puranas or they post-date them. Were these stories, or at least orally, were they around and shared during the very, very initial evolution of our civilizations, of our country, of our communities, and did they sort of get more codified as time progressed and we moved into an era where the conversations around dharma and morality sort of becoming more mainstream. I don't know. Apart from this, one of the things that actually caught my attention in the Vetalapancavinsati is how there is a recurrent conversation about Buddhism, specifically conversion to Buddhism and conversion back to Hinduism. What I mean is, some stories talk of kings who were Hindus, that is, who were Sanatanis, and then they converted to Buddhism, and then the story takes on from there. Then there are other stories where the kings were Buddhists and they became Sanatanis again, that is, a reverse conversion back into Hindus, because they gave up the converted practice of Buddhism that their forefathers had taken up or converted into. So then this makes me wonder, all right, if that is the case, then is it possible that these stories were actually evolving or being shared at the time when Buddhism was prevalent, or was at least growing in practice and in the psyche of the people? Or is it possible that Buddhism and Buddhist topics were inserted into these stories later, and the prototypes of these stories were already around for ages, and as time evolves, as people change, as beliefs change, those beliefs also get inserted into these narratives, and the stories also evolve accordingly. The stories of Vikram and Vetaal, the stories in Vetalapancavinsati, evolve according to the timeline. You can see within these stories itself that there is a lack of continuity, there is an absence of consensus, there is no consistency in the stories themselves. Some stories are very detailed, some stories are barely detailed, some stories have very visible ideologies that kind of form the foundation of those stories, and there are other stories that have no ideological backing but are just human interest stories. So there is just something different in each of the stories that the Vetala tells Vikramaditya. And to me, as a reader, as a listener, as someone who's interested in South Asian evolution, cultural evolution, for me these stories reflect a changing morality, a changing belief system, and changing times that are sort of represented through the evolution of the stories themselves, through the change of the stories themselves. So they reflect to me a much more simpler time when major issues were basically of food, water, shelter, and security and intimacy and things like that. And another time when, apart from all of these, it was also about your social prestige, your position in the in a society, your profession, your placement amongst your peers, your social capital that you brought in, your caste privilege. So a lot of these things also changed. So for me as a reader, I could feel that difference, and to me this also reflects how these stories have changed over time. So it was a very, very interesting read, and it was a read where it definitely does challenge you as a reader when you're reading it, because like I said, the book is a work of its time. What is this time? I don't know, because it seems like it's a work of multiple timelines, multiple time periods. Because like I mentioned, how it's also mentioned in the introduction, these stories seem to have come from an oral tradition that predate most of our traditions that we are familiar with today. And coming from an oral tradition, it has then kind of gotten infused and become a part of the written tradition, and today we have it in the form of a book. So over time, over place, over experience, over people's lifetimes, these stories have been infused with the flavors of the person who's been telling these stories, who's been sharing these stories, the experiences, their life experiences, their perceptions, their thinking about what morality and dharma are, right? And no matter, even if we consider this to be the translation of as authentic as a source to the closest written version of the Vetaal Vikram stories, by the time the stories were penned down by Sivadasa or by anybody else, those stories had undergone a major change and a major evolution from what they were at one point in time. So yeah, very interesting book. And I definitely think people should pick this up, especially if you like Vikram and Vetaal stories, and do answer these questions yourself, because these are riddles at the end of the day, and they really kind of help us understand how we think, and they also help us bring about kind of like shine light on our own biases, on our own prejudices, on our own thinking, and it kind of helps us think in a different way in terms of, why did Vikramaditya answer in this way? Why did I answer in this way? You can share this with your friends, with your family members, with your children, ask them to answer. And then you'll see, like, if there are 3 people in a family, you will get 3 different answers from this, right? So have fun with it. I think this is a very easy to read book. The book is actually a combination of prose and poetry. So there is, like it's here. So it starts with poetry, then there's prose, then there's some more poetry. And then there's prose again. So it's like a mixture of prose and poetry. So like here, so as you can see, there's a large chunk of poetry, but there's also prose here. So this book is very, in terms of literary, the kind of way it is written, it can appeal to both readers of poetry and both readers of prose as well. So I think you'll really enjoy this. So do pick it up. Let me know in the comments, have you read Vetalapancavinsati by Sivadasa? If you have, what do you think of this? And if you haven't, do you want to pick it up? And do let me know, what do you think of Vikram and Vetaal stories? Did you grow up listening to them? Were they one of your childhood staples like it was mine? Did you enjoy them? Let me know. All right. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Tales in Text. Bye bye.